This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly. I think I'm always
How are
going to
you?
just use that.
What's that?
I said, I think I'm always just going to say that.
Okay,
It's just going to be my thing.
your thing. It's morning.
Sorry, Caleb.
Yeah. What we got going today? We got a lot of stuff today. Oh, you're wearing sweat?
I got your face on my shirt, Kelly.
That's crazy, isn't it? I giggle every time I see that stuff. It's crazy.
It's funny because you got glasses on because you were wearing glasses at the time this
Yeah,
was
I wear
created.
I wear glasses when I'm not looking at things up close. So most of the time I'm wearing glasses.
So Kelly, where did we release your new merch?
At FETC.
That's right. And there's some people walking around with this shirt now.
There's lots of people. I was surprised. FETC, for those who are not familiar, is the Future in Education Technology Conference in Florida. We just got back a week or two ago.
Yep.
So that's still on front of everyone's mind. They had close to 10,000 people, if not more, that attended, that were all part of the technology portion of our current education system. So we had a pretty good show there. We had partners that were there with us that integrate with us, and they were all right around. And we had Kayla came up with this great program. Kayla and you, of course, and the marketing team came up with this great program that had these buttons that if they collected, they got entered into a drawing.
I got him.
Oh, you do? Oh, yeah.
This is what we did.
And so we made buttons for each of our integration types, our major ones for our partners that were there. And you went around to the partners and, oh, yeah. Oh, that doesn't show up very well. Oh, there it goes. Yep.
There it goes.
And that's what's on his shirt. And
Yep.
yeah,
cool.
So you went around, and if you collected all of the buttons from the partners, then you brought them back to us, and we entered you into the drawing. But if you wanted a coffee mug, like such, or a T-shirt, you had to talk with me on the podcast. And I was surprised on how many people at this conference that were really excited about talking. And we had you'll hear more about those or see those coming up in the near future, but we had a fantastic time.
There were some like really good conversations too.
Yeah. It was by far our best conference.
Oh
yeah, by far.
I think my favorite part was definitely the screens that we brought. They were like these 32-inch big screens that basically were like a state-up display, and people could like interact with it just as you would with our app. And
it was essentially a 32-inch
tablet
phone, really.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was touchscreen. It showed like you would if we were having our app on your phone, except for we could sit there and display it. People could watch, and we had two of those going because we had so many people. Plus, we have so many features. Sometimes somebody wanted to see a certain feature, and So yeah, it really was fantastic, and it was a lot of fun being with the kids, Ethan and Kayla,
We're the best team to hang out with.
the best.
All right, Kelly. So in this next section, it's called In the News. This is going to be our new thing.
Yeah, so you're going to describe the format of our podcast. We're going to try to keep to this format going forward.
We're going to try to keep to a format where we've got kind of segmented different sections, just to kind of split it up and give you that variety in the podcast, so it's not just one long discussion, even though those are still good. Trying to add more content into the podcast, which in and of itself is good content. It's like content inception.
Yeah, and there's lots of things that we want to talk about, but this is a way to get a variety of content into the same.
Yeah, we'll try to be quick.
Yep.
Just 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, and
maybe longer.
Yeah, I gotta reel this guy in, but it's tough work, guys.
Right.
So in the news, we're going to talk about a case that's been going on since I think it was in late November of 2020. What was it?
It's been a while.
Last name is, I don't know if you want to give out names.
No, let's try to keep it a little generic.
So there was a case where a underage student, 15 years old, went into a school and he killed 4 people and injured, I think, 7 others. So kind of the reason why we're talking about it is it's starting to set a precedent, because the parents are in court, and it's going through that whole process. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think we need to start seeing that, like, we're not just blaming one thing now. We're starting to look at why this happened, and it's like we're going as far back in time as we need to figure out what really was the cause or the blame or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And so I think in terms of time that these people are probably going to spend in jail is the longest that a parent has because of something like this. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, but I think that's the case.
So let's give the circumstances a little bit. People, if they want to do the research, they'll find it anyway.
Sure.
But I don't want to. I want to be from a generic perspective, right?
Yep.
So this is a case where the school was aware of this potential, and they talked to the parents, and the parents wouldn't take what was considered at the time the appropriate actions to stop that, and they basically were called into the school. It was discussed. They left without their child, and the child then, a short time later, I think it was a little bit more than an hour later, ended up shooting people at the school.
Wow. So it was that short of time between
it was a very short period of time, and
that part I didn't know.
There had been some discussions previously and so forth, and it was actually the parents who had purchased the weapon for the child, and now we move into the actual shooting. And it was a short time before the shooting that the weapon was purchased for the child. So obviously there's a lot of questions there, and now we start looking at responsibility and so forth. So you take that set of circumstances where um, there is a shooting and trying to push the blame to ultimately who's responsible for that act and what could have been put in place where that act could have been mitigated. I mean, we go back many, many years, and that's what we're trying to do is in these after action reviews and reports, what could we have done that would have prevented this incident from occurring?
Yeah.
And the more and more that we get educated or should be educating ourselves on these types of acts, it brings that level of expectation much higher. And when we start looking at who is responsible, it's not only those who were responsible 10 years ago for not seeing um, the potential in mental health issues, behavior issues, coping skills, conflict resolution skills. It's not only those people. Sure, if we had addressed these things, and we've talked quite a bit about addressing these things when they first pop up and then trying to track that and work through that. But we're talking about if you had taken some sort of act yesterday, this would not have occurred today.
Mm.
And Ethan and I talked off camera a little bit about this, is for the past 25 years, which is what we're coming up on the anniversary is in April, the 25th anniversary of Columbine. We've been trying to figure out how to stop this from occurring. And stopping this from occurring is different than preventing it from occurring, right?
Mm.
But the focus has been primarily on that very short time frame between the um, immediately before and immediately after the incident.
Sure.
And we've talked about expanding our scope and when do we start trying to prevent a shooting? Last week, 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, who knows, right? But from my perspective and things that we have talked about, we should be looking way back. But now we're also looking at that expectation of what the other families expect the schools to do and the parents of other kids now. And so we brought this up in this session or this edition because the mother of the child was convicted. And the so she's going to face some time. What that is, I think the potential's
Could be
like
a lot of time.
4 or 5 years, I think is what it is. But
I was seeing a lot more than that.
oh, were you? Oh,
I was
uh,
seeing like 15 on each account.
oh, maybe, yeah, maybe.
So,
I thought there was an expectation of 4 or 5 years, but okay.
yeah.
And now we're going to see in a very short period of time, in the next few weeks, I think, the trial for the father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so now this begs to that question is what is the expectation and what are the responsibilities of parents? What are the responsibility of the schools to notify parents? And then how do we, I guess, reconcile or bring those two responsibilities together to work through this? And I think there's lots of questions. Some of them that I can't answer. It's not my area of expertise. But I do know action is required, and this is one of the main reasons that we started this a year ago, and um, I'm I have a campaign, a self campaign of instead of say something or see something, say something. It's see something, do something. Now, in certain circumstances, saying something is enough. And that's obviously the first step. But then what do you do after that? And who's responsible to do it? If our whole campaign is see something, say something, at some point, somebody's got to do something with whatever it is. The assumption is that you're telling somebody who can actually do something. And that's one of those things that we have to start looking at, who is that person. And in many circumstances, that is the school official, not just law enforcement, not just the FBI, Secret Service, all of these people who are threat management people, not necessarily the right person. And at some point, we have to say, oh, I'm that person. And we have to identify who that is. Because here's the bottom line. And we're seeing it now. I imagine we're going to see more and more of this, because this is, as far as I know, this is the first case of this nature. But we're going to see more and more of these types of prosecutions under this umbrella of criminal negligence.
Yep.
This is your responsibility, whether you identify it as not, and you neglected to keep your school safe. We've talked about the OSHA requirements. We've talked about expectations. We've talked about all of these things. And I think this is where it's all coming to the arena of discussion now, is if you failed to do your job, people are going to start prosecuting.
Scary thought, but
at some point, that's where it ends, right?
Yeah. It's got to be held accountable, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It certainly puts a spin on that old saying that you and I have talked about. It ain't my job. This isn't what I signed up for. You're the principal, you're the safety coordinator, you're the superintendent. I think it is what you signed up for, whether you acknowledge that or not.
Yeah. So that kind of is a good transition into our main segment, which, so there's something that people have asked about, as a way to possibly stop an active shooter. Mm-hmm. And there's the idea that, hey, what if my teachers were armed? Mm-hmm. Would that actually be helpful? So, and there's a lot to it, and it's a pretty, it can be a pretty divisive kind of conversation. But I think that's why we're here. I think it's something that just needs to be talked through.
Yeah.
I don't think it's black and white, but
a lot of people do, right?
Yeah, you've got the experience, Kelly. So I'm gonna let you take it away.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that this is a topic today is, not too long ago, a school district announced they were going to arm their teachers. Yep. And I totally understand that. I will tell you that when I enter into a conversation with an educator, especially if it's face to face and I'm in the school, is some form of this question. Are you in favor of arming teachers? Would you advocate arming teachers? So forth.
Okay.
The quick answer to that is I am neither for it nor against it. And because there are so many factors involved that it's what are you willing to accept as an organization? And, there's lots of places around this country. Absolutely. I want 0 guns in our schools. Others, that's what SROs are for. Some districts are large enough that they have their own police department, so they have that perspective. But when we start talking about response to a shooter with the intent to prevent that from occurring, 1, 2, mitigating anything if it had already started, right? So you have a faster response. The 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 first factor is if you don't have that capability at the instant you need it, it's no good, right? So, or it's going to take longer for you to engage and mitigate whatever is occurring. So, having law enforcement respond, sure, but we've talked lots and lots about this. I mean, ad nauseum about this is you have a shooter and then you have a response time. Response times on average throughout the nation, all things considering, is about 8 to 10 minutes, right? So that 8 to 10 minutes is yours. So what do you do in that 8 to 10 minutes? We talked about emergency protective actions, standard response protocols through the I Love You Guys Foundation, all of these things, securing your schools, adding security measures and so forth. But you own that 8 to 10 minutes or however long it is for you in your circumstances. Now, do I think that having properly trained people who understand the circumstances and consequences of being armed in a school, having them available to respond and reduce that 8 to 10 minutes to 30 seconds or a minute or what have you? Absolutely. But here's the caveat to that: properly trained and understanding the consequences, right?
Yeah.
And
There's a lot to that.
there's a lot to that. And I tell everybody that comes into that discussion with me. 34 years in law enforcement, every law enforcement person who gets into this career understands this one thing, is that a firearm is a critical piece of equipment and mandate. I don't know of any law enforcement agency that would allow a police officer to be on patrol without a firearm. But they understand that. They get training. There's requirements. In my state and my agency, firearms training was considered a perishable skill. So that means you had to constantly train on it.
Yep.
And so it starts day 1 at the academy, learning how to handle a firearm, unload it, and work through that. And it's not till towards the end of the academy that you're even allowed to put a bullet in your in your weapon, and that's only under controlled conditions. So there's lots and lots that goes into that training, and then there's regular training after. There's in our situation, quarterly qualifications, yearly updates, yearly things like that, where we're working through scenarios and so forth. Having said that, having all that training, understanding, knowing what the consequences, the legal consequences, the moral, emotional, mental consequences, understanding all that, we still had difficulty getting people to meet those standards, to follow all of those mandates, and really become proficient in the use of firearms. And even there's probably that bell curve that we could apply here. We had 10% of our people who were absolutely proficient with the firearms. We had 10% who were not and struggled every time to qualify and maintain the standards. And then we had the 80%.
Are those the people that ended up as like an analyst?
Well, those are the people who struggled and or found another career, right?
Yeah.
But then you had that 80%. But that 80% were those people who met the minimum standards, right? They came in, they shot, they went through the training and moved on. But now you take that understanding that I came into my profession understanding that carrying a firearm is a necessary part of my job. And then you transfer that to the education system where not one school, well, I have to take the exception out, which is the military academies and those military schools where that's part of the culture there. But not one of our public schools, not one of our private schools that I'm aware of, where the educator said, carrying a firearm is a critical function of my job, and this is the reason I'm getting into education. Not one.
Yeah.
Do you have teachers and educators and educational professionals that are proficient with weapons? Yes. But they didn't get into that job thinking, this is what I'm going to have to do. So understanding all of the emotional consequences, the standards that you have to set and maintain, and so forth. You have to ask yourselves, is this what I want for my school, my organization? Because arming teachers, putting armed anybody in your school comes with consequences, good and bad. And you have to be willing to accept both. You can't just say, oh, this is for this, and then have a negligent discharge or what have you, and then say, oh, but I did it because of this, and so I'm good. That doesn't work.
Yeah, one of the things I think about is, you've got in those situations, you'd have someone that's totally comfortable with it, they're armed or whatever, and you've got the ones that are like, I'm not comfortable with it, I'm not going to be armed. Yeah. I'm also not for this at all, and they may be, disgruntled over it, and then you're going to start creating like these divisive issues, relationships between those two parties, and then that's a whole other thing. It's like,
but it's a thing, right? It's
like something you have to think about,
right? Because you have in many schools this thought that not only should we not allow our teachers to be armed, we are trying to get all guns out of the school, and
away from the people who are actually trained to use it.
Yeah, right? Um, but the idea that um, we are going to rid the world of guns is that ship has sailed from my perspective.
Yeah.
And so they're there. How are we going to mitigate? What are the best things that we can do to mitigate it? And that's a discussion that I'd happy to have with anybody, but I can't make that decision for you. And there are so many consequences. Like you just if you have a group of teachers or even a single teacher who is absolutely against having any firearm in your school, that becomes a problem. Either that teacher is going to be disgruntled or they're going to leave. And you might have several that say, I can't be in this kind of environment. I just,
Mm.
this is silly that we're in this and we're making these types of decisions. I can't disagree with that, but we are. And um, uh, you're already, as a profession, as it's being reported time and time again, um, having difficulty with hiring people and maintaining people and so forth. So having this as a mandate or a policy that even allows it under certain uh, parameters may cause you to have more issues with hiring people. Maybe not. I don't know. That's a
Mm.
discussion for you and the culture of your school. But those things are things that you have to consider. Um, we I did write a blog and it lists several things that you have to consider. Um, and we don't have enough time to go through all of those, but if you don't have a solid foundation in policy, requirements, mandates, training, and those types of things, it you're playing with fire.
All good stuff.
I'm just saying.
There's a lot to it.
Yeah.
You gotta invest a lot of time, resources. The
I mean,
decision is yours.
risk management 101 is going to play here.
Risk management 101.
Yeah.
Brought
Because
to you by Kelly
you're
Moore.
adding a huge layer, a very thick layer of risk when you go
Yes.
into this
Yeah.
realm.
I'm trying to think of any other security equipment or device or anything that could have a completely adverse, life-ending possibility to it.
Yeah.
Like your security cameras, you don't have to worry about your security cameras killing somebody.
I mean, the technology's out there that you could, right? So, I mean, um, they have uh, in our profession we call them less lethal, where we use them as training devices, where they have cameras. We're in front of the camera participating in a training scenario where we have laser um, capabilities on our weapons, where we're shooting at targets or based upon scenarios, we're shooting at, um, they call it, from back in the day, it's shoot, no shoot type scenarios. Is this a um, lethal scenario or not? Um, and um, sometimes those cameras can be equipped with rubber bullets that can shoot back at you, right? So um, uh, if you have that capability, you can add a lethal component to that. Just saying.
Wow.
And the military has that technology and is using that technology as we speak.
Man, that's pretty crazy.
But it's possible, right?
Man.
So, I mean, you see it on the air uh, air defense systems on ships,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true.
right? Is they have cameras, sensors, um, uh, infrared that are tracking targets. And if the target gets in within a certain, and it's identified as uh, a foe, then you can eliminate that target.
Give it a couple of years, you might see something that's cool.
Yeah, I would say you wouldn't, but never say never in this world,
Never say never.
right? But this is a perfect time to, when people are listening to this podcast, share your thoughts with us, and
Yes, definitely.
we'd love to have that conversation because this is a very important conversation, and
Yeah.
uh, I get it on both sides, but this is a conversation. If you're, I, honestly, I think this is a conversation everyone should have, because here's the bottom line: is if you are having a conversation as to whether or not to arm your teachers, you should also be having a parallel conversation that says, if we are not going to arm our teachers, what are we doing instead of? What are we doing to mitigate? What are we doing? And this could completely change that conversation and really work through, okay, let's say we're not going to do it. What does that mean to us? Right? So if we decide we're going to go down that path and we're going to arm our teachers, then we have to ask many questions. What does this mean to us? If you decide not to, then you have to ask that same set of questions from the flip side. What does that mean to us? What are we going to do to protect our kids, our staff, if we are not going to arm our teachers? Just saying.
Pretty good, Kelly. So I think this leads us to our next segment. I'm not sure if I'll always do this at the end or near the end, but that's what we're doing today. So this segment has been so eloquently titled by Kelly as the burning question. You ready for this one, Kelly?
I don't know. I don't know what it is.
I feel like I might know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it to you anyways.
Yeah, but we should describe. This is the idea behind this. Is I don't know what the question is.
Yeah,
so I have zero time.
Ideally, I'm going to ask you a question that I haven't asked you before. There's no conversation before, so this is totally like improv. And so the burning question is always going to come from an external person, whether that's someone from our audience or someone that maybe that we know that has asked us a question, and we're like, oh man, that's a good question to ask Kelly.
I just, when we were talking about this segment and what we should name it, as you're talking about that, I was just like, oh, that it's like this acronym, WWJD. What would Jesus do?
Yes.
We could do one with what would Kelly do? I'm just saying.
WWKD.
WWKD. What would Kelly do? Not that I'm comparing myself with Jesus. I'm not.
And that was the last podcast Kelly ever did.
Lightning just struck.
Oh man. Well, we'll leave it as burning question for now, but
okay.
Title might change. We'll see. Just always be prepared. So Kelly, I'm gonna phrase this as a question because it was kind of told to me in a longer form, but more simply, and since we're kind of on this active shooter topic that we've been on for most of the podcast, the question is there in any situation where you should tell your students to play dead? Is there any situation where that would actually make sense?
So the answer to that is yes.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, I was not expecting that at all.
And here is why. But I will, before I go into the why, I will tell you that I've never really thought about it until you just asked it.
Interesting. Okay.
And so the why is probably is in need of further exploration. But first, let me say my initial response was yes, and here is why. Because people have played dead and have survived as a result.
Really?
So,
wow.
Here is so people have held still, completely still, and they have survived. That being said, was that the reason they survived? I don't know. But I will say this is, and probably why Ethan has said he was surprised that I would answer that, is if you tell somebody to play dead in an area where there has been zero activity, the context isn't going to match.
Right. Yes.
Right.
That makes sense.
So, and there are things that we have to discuss about giving that command. If you're telling people, you're essentially saying, if you want to live, this is what you have to do, which under certain circumstances, that may be the right thing to do. It may not be. And so we have to look at situational awareness. We have to understand the context of what's happening around us. We have to say, is it going to match what's going on around us? And is it going to be believable? That when you say play dead, what does that mean? Hold still, don't move, don't make any sounds,
don't breathe,
don't
nothing.
Make any obvious movements. Breath is part of that. And isn't that kind of what we're saying when we're in lockdown? Locks, lights, out of sight, no noises, no sounds, no movement. That's kind of what we're doing. Now, of course, we're not calling it, oh, you should play dead. But,
right.
But we are having them remain motionless, not making any noise, so forth, right? So, but that's why I would say that. And like everything, there's not, oh yeah, you should tell everyone to play dead and they'll survive, because that's not the case. And when you start talking about that, you have to put it into the context. And now, is it an option? It is. It is an option, and that's one of those things that you can put in your toolbox that says people have survived playing dead, and you can take that out of the context of the active shooter at schools. That's been part of the lore in military operations, that they took victims and people who were actually dead and put them and hid behind them. But that creates the context, the proper context, right? Because they're in a place where things have happened. And if you're in a place where nothing has happened and you're playing dead, that's the context is not going, it's not going to be believable. So, and then you always ask the question, what happens if that doesn't work?
Right. There
What's
always needs
next?
to be a plan B.
There always has to be a plan B.
Yeah.
And how do you go from that position to a defensive position
Be
or an offensive position?
pretty tough.
Right.
Pretty tough.
Yeah. And can you sell that
when your heart's
when you need to
beating right out of your chest?
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that was interesting. I was surprised, but now I am very well educated.
What do you think of that answer? Is it okay?
I thought it was great. Right. I'll make sure the person who asked this question at least listens to that section of our podcast.
Is that your wife?
No.
No.
I don't think I even know who it was, actually.
No.
I was through the grapevine.
Yeah. Awesome.
I know someone that knows the person.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, those are questions types of questions we'll get all the time. So keep them coming. The answer to that burning question is the way that we have to look at everything that we do. Is there is no exact answer to everything. There are pluses and minuses to every question. And we talked about that within the context of the body of this podcast with arming teachers. It's not as simple as saying, what's the answer to this? We've talked about this in pretty extensively about there almost is never, ever a yes or no answer to any of the questions that we're being asked or we're trying to answer within the realm of safety, security, emergency management, emergency response. There is almost never it's either this or this. There's some continuum in there, and we try to pick what is the best. What is the best response? What is the best answer? What is the best procedure? What are the best practices? It's not the perfect practice. It's the best. Best is never absolute, right? And although people think it is, and that's why it's been so difficult for us to define things and educate people within these discussions. And the answer to that burning question, the discussion about arming teachers, is part of that.
Yeah.
So we have to become comfortable with making the best decisions we can under the circumstances that you're facing for your organization, for the individual teacher, for the individual student, the masses. All of those things come into play. So I think that's the important part of my conclusion.
Sounds good, Kelly.
What a nice shirt you're wearing, Ethan. That is awesome.
You know what the shirt's missing? I didn't even get a signature.
I signed a bunch of them.
I know. I just didn't think about it. And now I feel empty inside because I don't have a signature on my shirt.
Yeah, well, I will tell you that as it currently stands, we're planning to be back together in April. We'll see how that goes. But if that plan plays out, bring your shirt and I will. Not that signature means anything.
I'll pretend to be someone else and I'll be like, Kelly, sign my shirt.
Dude.
I'll just fangirl all over you, and then all the other people will be like, wow, this guy must be popular. I should get my shirt signed.
That's the silliest thing I've ever done. That's not true, but it's right up near the top. I've done lots of silly things, but signing somebody's shirt is something I never considered doing until somebody actually asked me to do so. I was like, what?
Oh, man.
Alrighty. Till next time.
Until next time, we'll see you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.